In Louisiana, we have 4 categories of people who can recover for the loss of a loved one. And in each category, if there is a person or a loved one, then the next category of people do not get to recover. It's called a ranking of categories or a ranking of priorities. In the very first category, you have the surviving spouse and children of the decedent. In the second category, you have parents. In the third category, you have siblings. In the fourth category, you have grandparents. If someone were to die and leave behind a large family, say a surviving spouse, several children, brothers and sisters, a dad, and grandparents, then in that case, Louisiana law would say that the surviving spouse of the decedent and the children would be the only one who could bring the wrongful death action. It doesn't matter that he has 9 brothers and sisters and both sets of grandparents. Neither one of them can recover. These are complicated matters and they're very sensitive matters. And I would encourage you to visit or contact a personal injury lawyer who's had experience in wrongful death. But in Louisiana, as in most states, there are certain types of things that we can recover for. Oftentimes we call them elements of damage. You have 2 broad categories. One would be special damages and one would be general damages. Special damages are those types of damages which you can actually add with a calculator. If someone in a wrongful death action didn't die immediately, but they were transported by ambulance to the hospital and they had multiple surgeries and stayed in the hospital a while, well, there would be associated bills with that. In addition, let's assume that that person also was working at the time and that he had viable income. Well, the surviving spouse or the children or whoever would bring the action has a right to recover for his loss of future income. So you could actually take a calculator and add the medical bills to the lost wages and come up with a figure. On the other hand, you have what's called general damages, and those are elements of damage which you cannot add. So in the same example, the person who died, well, the surviving spouse is entitled to recover for loss of companionship and loss of the enjoyment of life she would have had with that person, but you can't add it with a calculator. It's something you have to use your own life experiences to determine. You would have the loss of companionship of the spouse or the children. You had loss of consortium. You would have the mental anguish and pain that the surviving spouse and children now have as a result of no longer having the relationship with the decedent. You take the special damages, or typically medical bills and lost wages, and you add things such as loss of enjoyment of life, the loss of the relationship, loss of consortium, emotional pain and suffering of the survivor or the surviving spouse and children, and those would constitute the elements of damage for wrongful death in Louisiana. Basically, any type of action or wrongful conduct can give rise to a potential lawsuit. Now, the key is wrongful conduct. In Louisiana, as in most states, our conduct is governed by a reasonable person standard. It's often referred to as a tort. Did someone do wrong conduct or tortious conduct? And that type of action can constitute a tort for purposes of a lawsuit. And in the event that that type of action actually produced a death of someone or a family, then that type of action would give rise to a wrongful death lawsuit. You have to focus on the act. Was there liability or fault on the part of a person, a corporation, or a defendant that gives rise to filing a lawsuit for wrongful death? In my view, the things that you ought to look for in a wrongful death lawyer are one who's compassionate, one who's credible, one who's competent, and one who has the resources or currency necessary to see this type of case through. In these types of cases, the surviving spouse or children are going through a very tough and emotional time. And you need a lawyer who's going to understand that, who's going to be able to identify with that. And through his own life experiences, will be able to show compassion and reach out and understand and embrace your claim, your life, your family, and that of the decedent. Because the decedent has a life story that needs to be told and that needs to be embraced. And the lawyer should be able, through his own experiences, to compassionately identify with that. Sometimes in wrongful death cases, myself as an attorney, I have to deliver bad news to a client, or I have to deliver bad news to the family. It may be that things have taken a turn for the worse, and that the person who was sick has now died, and I may have to be involved in that. Or it may be that the case is not going as well as we once thought. So it's very important that that attorney is credible not only with you, but he's credible with the court. And that's pretty easy to determine. Just ask around people in the community, people in the bar. Is this attorney that I'm thinking about hiring a credible attorney? These aren't your typical cases, a little bitty auto accident or a slip and fall. Oftentimes they can be very serious, very hard fought, very long in terms of time to resolve. And you're going to need an attorney who knows what he's doing, that he's competent, that he's been through these types of battles before, that he has the experience necessary to go and try these cases and be successful in those trials. The last thing you want to get involved with is an attorney who's handling the wrongful death of your family or a loved one or a neighbor, but they don't have the necessary resources to fund these cases and finance them. What I mean by that is, if you're dealing with a medical negligence case, then you're going to have to hire doctors to defend and prosecute the case. If you're dealing with a products liability case, such as an airplane crash, you might have to hire experts such as engineers, structural, mechanical engineers, and people like that to help identify what happened in the accident. So oftentimes, since the wrongful death case has a large amount of money at stake, it's necessary to spend money to develop it because the other side is going to be fighting that much harder. So you want to make sure that the attorney you're hiring has the necessary resources, capital, or currency to prosecute that case all the way through the end, up to trial, up to appeal if necessary.